The city above pulsed with life, a symphony of noise, a riot of light, but beneath the bustling streets a different world existed, a world of cold, damp darkness, the subway, a labyrinth of tunnels, a steel and concrete serpent winding beneath the city's skin. The air hung heavy, thick, with the smell of ozone and a metallic tang that lingered on the tongue. Each echoing footstep was a hammer blow on the silence. The silence was a living thing, pressing in from all sides. It whispered of secrets buried deep, of stories the darkness could tell, stories of fear and despair, of things that lurked in the shadows. The lights flickered, an unsteady rhythm, a heartbeat on the verge of failing. Shadows danced and writhed, taking on monstrous shapes in the periphery. The cold seeped in, not just through clothing, but into bones, into the very marrow. Decades of history were etched into the grimy walls. Each scratch, each stain, a testament to the city's triumphs and tragedies. The subway was a living monument to time's passage, indifferent to the lives that flowed through it. Whispers followed you, echoes of conversations long past, lost in the darkness, or perhaps something else, something cold and hungry, listening, watching. There were stories, whispered in hushed tones, tales of disappearances. Most dismissed it as urban legend, a ghost story to frighten tourists and newcomers. But those who knew the subway's heart, those who felt its cold breath on their necks, knew better. They knew that in the darkness between stations, in the echoing silence of abandoned tunnels, something watched, something waited. It could sense fear, smell it like a predator scenting its prey. It lurked in the shadows, unseen, unheard, a whisper of cold air, a flicker of movement in the darkness. The subway's construction had been a monumental undertaking, a testament to human ambition, a desire to conquer the earth itself, tunneling deep beneath the city, carving out pathways for steel and steam. But some things, some places, are best left undisturbed. Ancient whispers filled the tunnels, echoes of a time before concrete and steel, when the earth held sway. They spoke of things forgotten, of powers that lurked beneath the surface. Some whispered of a presence, awakened by the city's relentless expansion, a guardian of the deep, angered by the intrusion. It saw the subway as a violation, a scar on the face of the earth, and it sought retribution. Workers told stories, strange noises in the dead of night. Over the years, the disappearances started. At first, they were infrequent. A homeless man seeking shelter in the tunnels, a drunk stumbling onto the tracks late at night. Easily dismissed, quickly forgotten, but then they became more frequent. A young woman rushing home after a late shift. A businessman absorbed in his phone, vanishing without a trace. The police investigated, of course, but the subway held its secrets close. Cameras malfunctioned, witnesses contradicted each other, or remembered nothing at all. A few officers, veterans of the transit system, whispered of a cover-up. They spoke of pressure from higher-ups to keep things quiet to avoid a panic. There were those who claimed to have seen it, fleeting glimpses caught from the corner of an eye, a shape in the darkness between stations, a reflection in the grimy window of a passing train. They spoke of glowing eyes, burning like embers in the black, of claws, long and sharp as shards of glass, of a stench of decay, of rot and mildew that clung to the air long after the creature was gone. These witnesses, often homeless or mentally unstable, were easily dismissed. Their stories, fueled by fear and desperation, were seen as nothing more than the product of overactive imaginations. But the whispers persisted. The train rattled and swayed, a metal behemoth hurtling through the arteries of the city. Inside, a lone figure sat bathed in the sickly yellow glow of the overhead lights. His name was Daniel. Daniel was a creature of habit. He worked late, always late. His life was a blur of deadlines, late-night coffee runs, and the ever-present glow of his laptop screen. The subway was his nightly companion, a necessary evil in his tireless pursuit of success. Tonight, however, felt different. The usual cacophony of noise seemed muted, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed in on him from all sides. The air hung thick and heavy, laced with a metallic tang that caught at the back of his throat. The train screeched to a halt, the sudden deceleration sending a jolt through Daniel's spine. He looked up, his gaze drawn to the reflection in the window opposite him. A sea of faces stared back, their features distorted by the grime and the flickering lights. He blinked, and for a fleeting moment he could have sworn he saw something else. A flicker of movement in the darkness behind him, a pair of eyes glinting with an unnatural light. He shook his head, attributing it to fatigue. His mind was playing tricks on him, conjuring up images from the horror movies he used to watch as a kid. The doors hissed open, releasing a gust of stale, humid air into the car. The train lurched forward once more, picking up speed as it plunged back into the black maw of the tunnel. Daniel glanced at his phone, checking the time again. Just a few more stops. He could almost taste the hot shower and the soft embrace of his bed. As the train pulled into the next station, Daniel noticed something strange. The platform was deserted. No waiting passengers, no bored-looking transit workers, not even the usual scattering of late-night stragglers. Just the flickering fluorescent lights and the endless rows of empty benches stretching out into the darkness. A shiver ran down his spine. He had never seen a station so utterly devoid of life at this hour. The doors slid open with a sigh, releasing a fresh wave of that unsettlingly cold air into the car. Daniel stood, his legs feeling heavy and leaden, as if an invisible weight had settled on his chest. He stepped out onto the platform, his footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the silence. The air seemed to crackle around him, charged with a strange energy that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He looked around, his eyes scanning the shadows, searching for any sign of movement, any indication that he was not alone. But the platform remained stubbornly empty. The only sound was the distant hum of the train as it pulled away, disappearing into the tunnel like a phantom. He was alone, utterly and completely alone. The scratching stopped. Silence descended again, heavier this time. It pressed on Daniel's eardrums, wrapped around his throat like an invisible hand. He strained to hear, his senses on high alert. He told himself it was rats. The subway was full of them, But deep down, a primal fear whispered a different story. The legend, the stories he'd dismissed as urban myth. Now they played in his mind, each whispered word a hammer blow on his dwindling courage. He edged backward, putting distance between himself and the source of the sound. A low growl, barely audible, sent a shiver down his spine. It wasn't a sound a human could make. It was something guttural, primal, the sound of a predator scenting its prey. He forced himself to move, to keep his back to the wall as he edged toward the opposite end of the platform. His hand trembled as he reached for his phone. No signal, of course not. He cursed his reliance on technology, on the illusion of safety it provided. Then he saw it. At the far end of the platform, a shape detached itself from the darkness. It was humanoid, vaguely, but twisted, wrong. Its limbs were too long, its movements too fluid, too silent, and its eyes... The creature moved with a speed that defied logic, gliding across the platform in a blur of motion. Daniel caught a fleeting glimpse of its face, a grotesque parody of a human visage, twisted into an expression of pure malice. Its claws, long and sharp as shards of obsidian, scraped against the concrete, sending sparks flying. The stench hit him then, a wave of putrid decay, of rotting flesh and stagnant water. It was the smell of death itself, and it clung to the creature like a shroud. He stumbled back, his foot catching on the edge of the platform. His phone slipped from his grasp, clattering uselessly onto the tracks below. He was trapped, cornered like an animal. His mind screamed at him to run, to fight, to do anything but stand there frozen in terror. But his body refused to obey. The creature hesitated, its head cocked to the side, as if listening to a sound only it could hear. The malevolent light in its eyes flickered, replaced by something akin to curiosity. It leaned closer, its grotesque face inches from his own. Daniel squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable, but the attack never came. Instead, he felt a cold, clammy hand brush against his cheek. It was a fleeting touch, gone as quickly as it came, but the sensation sent a fresh wave of terror through him. He opened his eyes, his breath catching in his throat. The creature was gone, vanished without a trace, as if it had never been there at all. The silence stretched, a taut wire about to snap. It was broken only by the frantic thump of Daniel's heart. He didn't waste time questioning his reprieve, didn't look back to see if the horror had truly gone. He ran as if the hounds of hell nipped at his heels. His lungs burned, legs screamed for respite, but fear lent him speed. The empty platform stretched before him, a tunnel of flickering light and oppressive shadow. Every echoing footstep was a prayer, a plea to whatever gods might be listening in this subterranean hellscape. The air, thick with the stench of decay, seemed to claw at him, trying to drag him back into the darkness. He didn't dare look back. He could feel the creature's presence behind him. A cold, malevolent shadow clinging to his heels. The memory of its eyes, burning with an unholy light, spurred him onward. echoes in the dark. The tunnel yawned before him, a black maw promising oblivion. He plunged into its depths, the darkness closing around him like icy water. The air grew colder, heavier, the metallic tang now overpowering. His footfalls echoed in the confined space, bouncing off the grimy, tiled walls. But another sound mingled with his own, a low, guttural growl, faint but unmistakable, seemed to slither along the walls, chasing him deeper into the labyrinth. Panic tightened its grip. He thought of the stories, the whispers of people vanishing without a trace, swallowed whole by the darkness. Was he destined to become another forgotten soul? His story reduced to a hushed warning in the dead of night? The thought spurred him onward. He had to get out, had to reach the light. But which way? The tunnel stretched before him, a twisting, turning maze with no apparent exit. False dawn. Ahead, a faint glow flickered. Hope, fragile as a newborn bird, fluttered in his chest. An exit, another platform. Salvation, in whatever form it might take. He surged forward, each step fueled by a desperate prayer. As he drew closer, the glow resolved itself. Not an exit, but a service ladder leading upwards. Maybe, just maybe, it led back to the world above, to the land of the living. He didn't hesitate. Gripping the rusted rungs, he hauled himself up, ignoring the protesting screams of his muscles. The air grew marginally less oppressive as he climbed. The stench of decay faded, replaced by the more familiar sense of dust and damp earth. A glimmer of light appeared above, a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. He pushed himself, fueled by adrenaline and a primal need to escape. Then he emerged. Sanctuary? He found himself in another tunnel, longer, wider than the last, but no less oppressive. The air hung heavy, thick with the smell of mildew and something else, something akin to ozone, but laced with a metallic tang that made him gag. The ladder ended abruptly, dangling precariously over a seemingly bottomless abyss. He clung to it, his muscles screaming in protest, his gaze desperately searching for another escape route, but there was none. He was trapped. A low growl, barely audible at first, resonated through the tunnel. It grew louder, closer, morphing into a guttural rasp that seemed to claw its way up his spine. Daniel's blood ran cold. He knew that sound. He knew what it meant. He craned his neck, peering into the darkness that stretched out before him. His heart hammered against his ribs, each beat a frantic drum beat in the silence. His eyes, now accustomed to the gloom, picked out faint shapes moving in the distance. Shapes that sent shivers down his spine. The hunt continues. They were there. Multiple pairs of eyes glowing with an eerie light materialized in the darkness. They darted back and forth like predators sizing up their prey. He was surrounded. He had stumbled from one nightmare into another. This was no ordinary tunnel. It was a lair, and he had trespassed on sacred ground. The growls grew louder, closer. Daniel closed his eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. He pictured his apartment, his life above ground, so close, yet impossibly far away. He thought of the sun, the warmth on his skin. He would never feel it again. The growls morphed into hisses and snarls, a cacophony of sound that promised a swift and brutal end. He clung to the letter one last time, his knuckles white with effort, his body trembling with fear. Then, with a resigned sigh, he let go. The darkness swallowed him whole. The city above, oblivious to the horrors unfolding beneath its skin, continued to pulse with life. But in the depths of the subway, the hunt continued. The creature, no longer alone, had claimed another victim, and the whispers in the dark grew louder, more insistent, a chorus of shadows celebrating their victory.